The morning after a heavy storm in Texas, Linda took Max, a golden retriever, out for their usual walk. But when her golden retriever Max suddenly tore the leash from her hands and began digging frantically in the mud, she knew something was terribly wrong. What he uncovered was shocking: a tiny, half-buried bobcat kitten. Then Max froze, sniffed the air. Something told him there was another. Just feet away, Max started digging again. And then another. 2 fragile bundles, barely breathing. But the real shock: Max wasn't done digging. What began as a morning walk turned into an extraordinary rescue, a race against time, and the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond that quiet country road. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The storm had raged through Mission, Texas for 3 days straight. Rain hammered the tin roofs of homes along the rural outskirts, and the wind bent the mesquite trees nearly double. Water rushed through ditches that were usually dry, carving new channels through the red clay soil and leaving debris scattered across roads and fields. By the time the clouds finally broke apart on that Tuesday morning, the landscape looked like it had been shaken and rearranged by some careless giant's hand. Linda Morrison stood on her back porch, surveying the damage with a weary sigh. Branches littered her yard, and her vegetable garden was a muddy disaster. At 63, she'd weathered plenty of storms in her lifetime, but each one seemed to take a little more out of her. Still, the morning air smelled clean and fresh, and golden sunlight was breaking through the departing clouds in long, hopeful rays. "Come on, Max," she called, reaching for the leash hanging by the door. "Let's go see what the storm left behind." Max, her 5-year-old golden retriever, bounded to her side immediately, his whole body wiggling with excitement. He'd been cooped up inside during the worst of the weather, and his energy was barely contained. Linda smiled despite her fatigue. Max had been her constant companion since her husband Robert passed away 2 years ago. The dog had an uncanny ability to sense when she needed comfort, often resting his head on her lap during her loneliest evenings. They set out down the familiar dirt road that ran past her property, Max trotting ahead on his retractable leash. The road was a mess. Puddles everywhere, and the ditches on either side were swollen with muddy runoff. Linda picked her way carefully, her rubber boots squelching in the soft earth. The morning was peaceful, except for the chirping of birds returning after the storm, and she felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. They'd walked perhaps a quarter mile when Max's demeanor suddenly changed. His ears perked forward, his tail went rigid, and his nose dropped to the ground. He began sniffing frantically, moving back and forth across the road in an erratic pattern. "What is it, boy?" Linda asked, but Max wasn't listening. Without warning, the dog lunged forward with such force that the leash was ripped from Linda's hand. She cried out in surprise as Max bolted toward the ditch on the right side of the road, his golden coat flashing in the sunlight. "Max! Max, come back here!" Linda hurried after him as fast as her aging knees would allow, her heart pounding with a mixture of annoyance and concern. Max never behaved like this. He was usually so well-trained, so obedient. By the time she reached him, Max was pawing desperately at something in the grass beside the ditch. Mud was flying in all directions, coating his paws and chest. His breathing was rapid and focused, and he made small whining sounds in his throat. "Max, stop that right now," Linda began, but then she saw what he was digging at. A tiny creature lay half buried in the damp vegetation and mud. At first, Linda thought it might be a kitten, a domestic cat that had gotten lost in the storm. But as she knelt down for a closer look, her breath caught in her throat. The tufted ears, the spotted fur pattern, the distinctive facial markings. This was no house cat. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's a bobcat." The kitten was impossibly small, no bigger than a guinea pig, and utterly still except for the shallow rise and fall of its tiny ribcage. Its fur was plastered to its body with mud and moisture, and its eyes were closed. Linda could see it was in terrible condition, cold, weak, and barely clinging to life. She reached out with trembling hands, afraid to touch it, but equally afraid not to. The kitten was ice cold to the touch, and when she gently lifted it from the mud, it barely responded, making only the faintest mewing sound. It couldn't have weighed more than 2 pounds. Linda's mind raced. Where was the mother? Bobcats were notoriously protective of their young. Had the mother been killed in the storm? Or had something frightened her away? She scanned the surrounding area nervously, half expecting an angry adult bobcat to come charging out of the brush. But Max had already moved on. A few feet away, he was digging again, even more frantically than before. His paws worked like pistons, throwing mud and grass in great arcs. "Max, easy," Linda started to say, but then the dog's paw struck something solid but yielding. He paused, looked back at Linda, and whined urgently. Linda carefully set the first kitten down on a relatively dry patch of grass and moved to where Max was digging. She dropped to her knees, her jeans immediately soaking through with cold mud, and began brushing away the wet soil with her hands. Her fingers encountered fur, then a small, pointed ear, then a tiny, mud-caked face. Another kitten. This one was buried deeper, and Linda's heart constricted with fear as she worked to free it. Had it already suffocated? Was she too late? Her fingers moved faster, careless of the cold mud or the way it packed under her fingernails. Finally, she pulled the second kitten free from its muddy grave. It was slightly larger than the first, maybe 3 or 4 pounds, and its coat was darker. For a horrible moment, it didn't move at all. Then its mouth opened in a silent gasp, and its sides heaved with a shallow, desperate breath. "Thank God," Linda breathed. She sat back on her heels, a kitten in each hand, and tried to think clearly through the adrenaline flooding her system. These kittens needed help immediately. They were hypothermic, possibly injured, and definitely orphaned. But what was she supposed to do? She couldn't just take them home and try to raise them herself. They were wild animals, and they needed specialized care. Besides, it was illegal to possess wildlife without proper permits. Max pressed against her side, his tail wagging slowly as he gazed up at her with soulful brown eyes. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "Good boy," Linda murmured. "You're such a good boy, Max." "You found them." With both kittens cradled carefully against her chest, Linda struggled to her feet and hurried back toward her house as quickly as she dared. Every step jostled the tiny creatures, and she whispered reassurances to them even though she knew they probably couldn't hear her. Back at the house, she gently laid them on a towel on her kitchen table and grabbed her phone with muddy hands. Her fingers shook as she searched for wildlife rescue organizations in the area. She'd heard of a place called Critter Care Wildlife Society. They sometimes took in injured animals from the local area. She dialed the number and held her breath as it rang. "Critter Care Wildlife Society. This is Jennifer speaking." "Yes, hello, Linda's voice cracked. She took a breath and tried again. "I've found 2 bobcat kittens. They're very small, very cold, and I think they were abandoned. There's no sign of a mother anywhere. I don't know what to do." There was a brief pause, and Linda could hear papers rustling in the background. "Okay, ma'am, first thing, don't try to feed them anything," Jennifer said firmly but kindly. "No milk, no formula, nothing. Their digestive systems are very delicate, and the wrong thing could kill them. Do you have heating pads?" "Yes, I think so." "Get them warm, but not hot. Wrap the heating pad in several layers of towels so they don't overheat. Keep them in a quiet, dark place. Can you bring them to us? We're in Mission, on Highway 83. Yes, I can," Linda said, relief flooding through her. "When should I come?" "Right away. I'll call our wildlife specialist and have her prepare for intake. We'll be ready for you." Linda found her heating pad, wrapped it in towels as instructed, and carefully placed both kittens on top of it. She found a cardboard box, lined it with more towels, and created a warm, secure nest. The kittens barely moved as she worked, which terrified her. Were they dying right before her eyes? She put the box carefully on the passenger seat of her truck. Max hopped into the back, and she drove toward Mission with exaggerated care, taking every turn slowly and avoiding potholes. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The drive seemed to take forever, but it was only about 25 minutes. Critter Care Wildlife Society was a modest facility set back from the road, surrounded by trees and chain-link enclosures. Several vehicles were parked out front, and as Linda pulled in, she could see people waiting by the door. A woman in her 30s with short brown hair hurried over as Linda got out of the truck. She wore cargo pants and a t-shirt with the Critter Care logo. "I'm Sarah Martinez, the wildlife rehabilitation specialist," she said. "You have the Bobcat kittens?" Linda nodded and carefully lifted the box from the passenger seat. Sarah peered inside, her expression growing more concerned. "Let's get them inside immediately," she said. Linda followed Sarah through the doors into a clean, clinical-looking room. 2 other staff members were waiting, and a metal examination table had been prepared with towels, heat lamps, and medical supplies. Sarah gently lifted the first kitten, the smaller one, and placed it under the warmth of the heat lamp. "This one's severely hypothermic," Sarah said, running expert hands over the tiny body. "Maybe 3 weeks old, possibly younger. Female." She checked the kitten's gums, felt its abdomen, and listened to its heart with a stethoscope. "Heart rate's too slow. We need to get her temperature up gradually." She moved to the second kitten and performed the same examination. "This one's maybe 4 weeks old, also female. Slightly better condition, but not by much. They're both dehydrated and malnourished." Linda watched anxiously as the team sprang into action. One staff member prepared syringes of electrolyte solution for subcutaneous administration. Another adjusted the heat lamps. Sarah spoke in calm, efficient tones, coordinating the care. "What happened out there?" Sarah asked Linda as she worked. "Where did you find them?" Linda explained about the storm, about Max's strange behavior, about finding the kittens buried in the mud by the ditch. Sarah nodded grimly. The mother probably had a den nearby, maybe in a culvert or under some debris. The storm must have flooded it. She probably tried to move the kittens to safety, but something went wrong. She might have been killed, or she might have been separated from them and couldn't find them again. Bobcats usually have 2 to 4 kittens, so there might be others out there, but... She trailed off, and Linda understood. If there had been others, they probably hadn't survived. "Will these 2 make it?" Linda asked quietly. Sarah looked up, and her expression was honest but not unkind. "I don't know. The first 72 hours are critical. They're in shock, they're hypothermic, and they're very young. But they have a fighting chance now, and they wouldn't have had any chance at all if you and your dog hadn't found them. Max, who had been sitting patiently by the door, gave a small woof as if he understood. Sarah smiled. He's a hero, your dog. Bobcat kittens don't have much scent at this age, and they were buried in mud. Most dogs would have walked right past them. Linda felt tears prick her eyes. She reached down and stroked Max's head. He's always been special. You should head home and get cleaned up, Sarah said gently. We've got their information and your contact details. We'll call you with updates, I promise. There's nothing more you can do here. Linda hesitated, reluctant to leave the tiny creatures she'd found, but she knew Sarah was right. She took one last look at the kittens lying under the heat lamps, so small and vulnerable, and then turned to go. Thank you, she said. Please save them. We'll do everything we can, Sarah promised. The next 10 days were agony for Linda. She called critter care every single day, sometimes twice a day, desperate for news. Max seemed to sense her anxiety and stayed close by her side, more attentive than ever. The reports were touch and go at first. Both kittens had to be tube-fed every few hours because they were too weak to nurse properly. Their body temperatures had to be carefully monitored and regulated. The smaller kitten, the staff had started calling her Cake, developed a respiratory infection and had to be put on antibiotics. The larger kitten, whom they'd named Cream, was slightly stronger but still dangerously fragile. They're fighters, Sarah told Linda during one phone call. Especially Cake. She's tiny, but she's got spirit. On the 11th day, Linda received the call she'd been praying for. They've turned the corner, Sarah said, and Linda could hear the smile in her voice. They're both eating well. Their body temperatures are stable, and they're starting to show real bobcat kitten behavior, hissing at us, trying to bite. It's a wonderful sign. Linda laughed and cried at the same time. Can I come see them? Not yet, Sarah said. We need to minimize human contact as much as possible. These kittens need to remain wild. The less they associate humans with comfort or food, the better their chances of successful release. But I'll send you photos, okay? The photos arrived later that day, and Linda must have looked at them 100 times. 2 small bobcat kittens, their fur now clean and fluffy, staring at the camera with those distinctive gold-green eyes. They were in separate enclosures. Sarah explained they had to be kept apart initially to prevent disease transmission and to monitor each one's individual progress. Over the following weeks, Linda received regular updates and more photos. The kittens were moved to what the staff affectionately called the juvenile delinquent room, a large indoor space filled with platforms, logs, ropes, and hiding boxes. In the photos, Linda could see Cake climbing eagerly on everything, while Cream was more cautious, often watching her sister before attempting anything herself. They've bonded beautifully, Sarah reported during one call. Cake's definitely the bold one, first to explore, first to try new foods, first to climb. Cream's more thoughtful, but she's just as capable. They sleep curled up together, and they play fight constantly. It's exactly what we want to see. As autumn turned to winter, the kittens were moved to an outdoor enclosure designed to mimic their natural habitat. It had native plants, logs, rocks, a small pool, and plenty of places to climb and hide. The staff left them live prey, small rats at first, then larger ones, and watched with satisfaction as the kittens' hunting instincts kicked in. They're doing everything right, Sarah told Linda during a winter phone call. They're wary of humans, they're hunting successfully, and they're maintaining appropriate wild behavior. If they keep progressing like this, we'll be able to release them in the spring. Spring came slowly to South Texas that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought warm sunshine and blooming wildflowers. Linda received a call from Sarah in late March. "We're planning to release Cake and Cream in 2 weeks," Sarah said. "We've identified a perfect location, plenty of prey, good cover, no nearby roads, and minimal human activity. We'll be doing soft release, which means we'll set up a temporary enclosure on site and gradually open it so they can explore and acclimate before they're completely free." "That's wonderful," Linda said, her voice catching. "I know you haven't been able to see them," Sarah continued, "but we thought you might like to visit before they go." "You and Max. He deserves to see them one more time, too. It would have to be from a distance, through the fence, but would you like to come?" "Yes," Linda said immediately. "Yes, we'd love that." 3 days later, Linda and Max returned to Critter Care Wildlife Society. Sarah met them with a warm smile and led them around to the back of the facility, where the outdoor enclosures were located. "They're in the far enclosure," Sarah said quietly as they walked. "Try to move slowly and don't call out to them. They're fully wild now, and we want to keep it that way." Linda's heart was pounding as they approached the large, naturalistic enclosure. At first, she couldn't see anything, just bushes, rocks, and dappled shade. Then Max gave a soft whine, and movement caught her eye. 2 young bobcats emerged from behind a large rock. They were magnificent. No longer tiny, mud-covered scraps of life, but sleek, powerful predators. Their coats gleamed in the spring sunshine, and their movements were fluid and confident. They had to weigh 15 or 20 pounds each now, Linda estimated. They were healthy and strong and absolutely beautiful. The bobcats froze when they spotted the humans, their ears flattening slightly. But then something seemed to change. One of them, Cake, Linda somehow knew, took a cautious step forward. Her nostrils flared as she scented the air. Max's tail began to wag slowly. He didn't bark or lunge at the fence, just stood there, watching the bobcats with those wise, gentle eyes. Cream followed her sister's lead, and both young bobcats moved closer to the fence. They didn't approach like tame animals seeking attention. There was wariness in every line of their bodies. But there was also something else. Recognition, perhaps. Some deep, instinctive memory of the dog and the woman who had saved them from the mud. For a long moment, they all stood there in the warm spring sunshine. Woman, dog, and 2 wild bobcats, connected by an invisible thread of shared history. Linda felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. These weren't tears of sadness, but of joy and gratitude and wonder. She thought about that stormy morning, about Max pulling away from her and digging frantically in the mud, about 2 tiny kittens who had been hours away from death. And now look at them, wild and free and ready to return to the world where they belonged. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. Max, for his intuition and determination. Sarah and the staff at Critter Care, for their expertise and dedication. The universe itself, perhaps, for putting them all in the right place at the right time. After a few more minutes, the bobcats melted back into the shadows of their enclosure, disappearing as if they'd never been there at all. Linda knew it was time to go. As she and Max walked back to the truck, Sarah accompanied them. "They'll be released next week," Sarah said. "We'll take them out at dawn, open the enclosure, and step back. With any luck, they'll disappear into the wild and we'll never see them again." That's success in wildlife rehabilitation, when our patients leave and never come back. Will they be okay out there? Linda asked. There are so many dangers. Cars, hunters, disease. They will face challenges, Sarah admitted. That's the reality of being wild. But we've given them the best possible start. They know how to hunt. They're wary of humans. They understand their territory. They have each other for now, though they'll probably separate eventually. Female bobcats are solitary except when raising young, but they're equipped to survive, and that's all we can do. Linda nodded, understanding even as her heart ached a little. You know, Sarah continued, most people would have walked right past those kittens. It was raining. They were buried. And honestly, most people wouldn't have wanted to get involved even if they had found them. But you stopped. You helped. You called us instead of trying to handle it yourself. You did everything right, and because of that, 2 wild lives will continue. That matters. Max did the hard part, Linda said, reaching down to ruffle her dog's ears. I just made some phone calls. You both did the hard part? Sarah corrected with a smile. It's a team effort. Rescuers like you, rehabilitation specialists like us, and the amazing resilience of the animals themselves. Linda left critter care that day with a full heart. She never saw Cake and Cream again. They were released the following week into a protected area of South Texas wilderness. And as Sarah had said, they vanished into the wild without looking back. But sometimes, on her morning walks with Max, Linda would pause by the ditch where they'd found the kittens. The area had long since recovered from the storm, and new grass grew thick and green. She would stand there for a moment, remembering that chaotic morning, and she would smile. Somewhere out there, 2 bobcats were living their wild lives, hunting, exploring, surviving. They would never remember the humans who saved them, and that was exactly as it should be. But Linda would remember. She would remember the weight of those tiny, cold bodies in her hands. She would remember the fear and the hope. She would remember Max digging frantically in the mud, refusing to give up until both kittens were found. And she would remember that sometimes, on the worst days, in the aftermath of storms, small miracles can happen. Sometimes, the lost can be found. Sometimes, the dying can be saved. Sometimes, a good dog and a caring human can make all the difference in the world. Max would lean against her leg during these moments, his tail wagging gently, and Linda would think that Robert would have loved this story. He would have been proud of both of them. "Come on, boy," she'd say eventually, giving Max's head a final pat. "Let's go home." And they would walk back down the dirt road together, woman and dog, knowing they'd been part of something larger than themselves. A small but significant thread in the great interconnected web of life that bound all creatures together, wild and domestic, human and animal, in this beautiful, complicated world.